character concepts. All
All
right,
right,
so real quick, welcome
Petas.
Petas. We're going to get started on the character concept today. And for the first character, for the next character this week, it'll actually be Boom the Wasp. The Wasp. All right. So if you guys followed last week, I actually did Ant-Man, which was really, really cool. I was excited about that. I learned some things about the last video, primarily how not to make it an hour and a half long. I've understood that. So hopefully this time it'll not be super, super, super long, and hopefully you guys enjoy this character. Like I've said before, I screenshot these and I put them on my Reddit page. That is in my bios. If you guys want to go check out this post or any of my previous posts, I think they're super cool. If you guys have any cool ideas of characters, maps, ideas for rivals, go ahead and let me know. I'd be more than interested to talk about them with you guys. Other than that, let's go ahead and get started on this, Johnson. All right, so the Wasp. So she's going to be support. That's my idea for her. I think it would be really cool. She's going to have about 225 health, and she'd be 1 out of 5 stars. I know, like Josh, it's kind of on the low side. That is true. That is true. But for my idea for the Wasp, I think she could be, a one like star, 2-star character, especially with the kit I have going for her. Like, I don't want her to be like the easiest thing known to man, but I just personally don't see her being, like crazy high tech type of character. Now she could, that would be really, really cool, but this is just my idea. We'll have to wait to see what the devs do. All right, so this is kind of like a disclaimer real quick. So the Wasp would have like a smaller statue from the rest of the characters, but it would not be tiny. This is not going to be an Ant-Man situation where, she's shrunk for the whole game or stuff like that. And I've already kind of talked about this in my Ant-Man video, like why I don't really think stuff like that would work, like for the whole game, primarily because, hitbox, stuff like that. Like, I just don't see that being manageable in a game like this, which is a hero shooter. So I would say, I would have to border on some of the Ant-Man ability idea concepts, which is whenever she's doing her ability, she would shrink, and stuff like that. But like that, she would also be a flying character, similar to how Iron Man and Ultron are passively flying, and the flying is kind of built into her kit. That's what we would have here. All right. So for the first ability, which would be Wasp String, and remember, I've said this before, my character concepts are based off of the PlayStation because I play on PlayStation. So when you're looking at these abilities, convert them or, just translate it real quick. If I'm saying R2, you're like, what is R2? I play on PC. R2 is my primary trigger, and that's why I kind of wrote these like names right next to it. That way you don't have to be like, oh, well, like, what is it real quick? I tried to make it a little easier for you guys. All right, so first one would be Wasp String. So this would be Wasp Primary Fire, which is a fierce hit scan blast, similar to kind of like the Luna Blast, which would heal and damage enemies. Either way, it would be doing about 20 to 30 points, damage or healing. And each round would be about 9 shots. And they'd be like shot off and burst to 3, like do-do-do, do-do-do, or like do-do-do. I think both hands could be cool, or like one hand, maybe go like do-do-do, or do-do-do, maybe just do-do-do, something like that. I think it'd be really cool. And it would, like I said, there'd be 9 shots. It would be in 3 rounds, and then it has to reload. I think it's pretty generic. I think it's really cool. She has a little wasp stings. All right, next would be her flying ability. So this is what I was kind of talking about with, her passive-ish, kind of being like Ant-Man and Ultron, like these flying characters. I definitely want to see another flying support, and I think this would be like a really cool, character. All right, so this is going to be called Biosynthetic Wings. These are going to be based off her wings, obviously, and it's going to be her most prominent power that we've seen, and, obviously with her Wasp Sting. Again, it's going to be similar to very other flying characters. The left side of the controller would control her up and downs. A bumper would be up, trigger would be down, or however, you configure it on the controller. Personally, I like to do it this way. I don't really understand why some games make it like backwards or have like flying over here and then all the way over here is, the flying down button or stuff like that. I don't know. To me, it just makes sense going the upper button's up, the lower button's lower. That makes sense to me, you know? All right. Next ability, it's an actual passive, which is called the Van Dine Strine. Or, sorry, Van Dine. I'm not a LARPer, I promise. Stride. So as the Wasp is flying around the map, saving the day, she builds up a meter, which would then all affect Insect Evade, which is the next ability we're going to talk about. So don't be a little. I know it's going to be like, Josh, I don't know what that is. We're about to get into it. If the Wasp has not used this ability yet, then the meter would passively heal any health that the Wasp is missing. This meter would take up about 10 to 12 seconds to fully reach capacity. So the way I was kind of thinking about this is we've seen meters before in Marvel Rivals. This would be kind of just like the same thing, kind of like Angela's meter is what I'm thinking. As she's flying, it builds up. Exact same idea. It's exactly what I got planned for this. And you're like, Josh, what is Insect Evade? I don't know what that is. So this would be her triangle ability. So, if the Wasp is caught in a fierce, like a feisty situation, then by pressing triangle or whatever, other, like circular button you would want to name it, square or circle, whatever. She would shrink down. This is what I'm talking about her abilities, where I think it would really work, and then she would fly away for a few seconds. During this time, she would be able to choose any and all directions. So, unlike Hello's ability, where you're just flying in one direction, she would actually be able to move wherever as she's timed. This would be kind of like Thor's ability, where he flies off with his hammer, and he can kind of choose what ability. This is kind of the same idea for that. That way, it's not like she's just stuck going one direction. And then, obviously we're talking about the Van Dine Strine. So if her meter is available, she would and you could press a secondary button or something to use this. But how it would work is, hold on. Yeah, sorry, you would be pressing the triangle. I don't know what I was thinking. You'd be pressing the triangle, and if the meter is available, you would be leaving behind a trail of healing, which I think is a really cool idea. So, kind of like a way to visualize it is, think about like a bee. I know she's not a bee, she's a wasp. I know there's a difference. Think about like a bee. Like bees leave behind like a trail of pollen and stuff like that. So the wasp would be doing kind of a similar idea. It should be like a trail of healing particles, which I think would be really cool. And so basically, anybody that walks into the trail would be healed. It's not crazy healing, but it is like another form of healing. And sorry, and that's why I was saying if she's not using it actively, she could be healing herself as she's flying. So once the meter's up, you kind of get a window of time, before you start healing herself. Or if you're already healing, obviously it just sits there. But then you just press triangle, and then boom, you can just leave behind the trail of healing real quick. Obviously it's a boost too, so I think that'd be really dope, really, really, really dope. Hold on, I just want to clarify real quick. So when you start flying away, it is a boost, So I just want to make that clear. Like we're saying hella, so I just want to clarify that. It was shrink down and quickly. Yeah, okay. Fly away quickly. So I just wanted to clarify that, unless it wasn't sure, clarified itself already. All right. So secondary fire would be unstoppable blast. So during the heat of battle, the wasp would be able to bring out her stingers together, however they want to create her hands, and she would shoot out a powerful beam that goes through all shields and is able to heal any and or it's able to heal and or deal stun damage. So this would count as a blast ability and affect all who are nearby. This is not like a big, Magneto bubble or whatever. This is just a small little circle, I know you're like, Josh, this sounds exactly like no. If you want to think about her snowball, yeah, that could kind of be the size if you want to think about it, or White Fox's left trigger or secondary fire. That's kind of the size of how it would work. But it would go through shields, kind of like Magneto. He always puts up a shield. No, not today. We're going through that, Johnson. Or, you're like, okay, well, Josh, what about all the tank shields? Nope. Strange's shield? Nope. I know you're like, Josh, that makes no sense. They're doing magic. They got Asgardian, Vibranium. How are these particles going to get through? Well, because I said so. That's how. Like, Josh, makes no sense. It doesn't have to. We're playing Marvel Rivals, a character's about superheroes. But nonetheless, I think that'd be a really cool ability. It goes through, and it's like a blast effect. Especially if you want to hit the ground. Maybe you can't. Maybe you're like, oh, this isn't the right angle. I don't want to hit their shield or whatever. You can just hit their feet. Kind of like how Iron Man's Repulsor Blast does a blast thing. And when it hits them, like I said, obviously it would heal, but it could also stun the enemies, stuff like that. So like I was saying, like if you don't like if you're hit firing against your teammates, there's no reason to go through a shield. You could just blast by all their feet, and they get healed, which I think would be really really dope. All right, ultimate ability would be called Wasp Nest. For the Wasp ultimate ability, she would go into like this overdrive state for about 12 to 15 seconds, where she has an unlimited firing power. So as opposed to what I was saying earlier with like the 9 shots, this would just be like unlimited for her whole ultimate time. She would obviously get a speed boost, and she would shoot out powerful beams that go through all. Sorry, reading the wrong one. Yeah, sorry. So she had unlimited firing power. She would get a speed boost, and every enemy she hits is slowed, and every ally she hit would receive a movement boost. So let's go over that again real quick. So she does her ultimate L3 R3 real quick, and then boom, she gets a movement boost already, and then she has unlimited firing power. Any enemy she hits, boom, they're stunned. Any ally she hits, boom, they're boosted, movement boosted. So I think that'd be really dope. And then whenever she uses this ability and she fires at people that are nearby, we're gonna get a similar to like a shock ability where if I hit you right here and then Johnny and Daryl are all right there, they also get shocked. So kind of like that ability, and it'll work on both fronts. And the more people that are in this like little congested area, the more the effects would work. So let's say there's like 4 people on the other team real quick contesting point. Well, if they're all like relatively close to each other and the Wasp hits them with their ultimate, boom, they're slowed down instantly, Maybe that could save you from going into that overtime and, getting point and stuff like that. Or maybe we are pushing point in overtime, about to be overtime, and this helps us, contest. I think this would be a really cool idea. When I was coming up with this, I was having a little bit of a hard time, like what could be her ultimate ability, instead of just like growing big and all that. And I was thinking to myself, a lot of people complain about a bunch of ultimate abilities for supports just being healing. So I think this personally would be like a really cool idea. Also, I know a bunch of you guys are going to be like, Josh, she's the Wasp. She's not growing a lot. She's not shrinking a lot. You're right. I didn't really, I couldn't really come up with a lot of ideas for her to, just like be shrinking and all that. I know she's the Wasp. It's like in her name that she's supposed to be small. But I mean, personally, I couldn't come up with really ideas for like her to have the need to be small. So that's why I was kind of like, if you could just have like a smaller statue in the game already, that way you can kind of compensate a little bit for it. And then like, there's an ability in here where she can shrink. Maybe she flies and it's an animation where she kind of shrinks and then she gets bigger again, something like that. But personally, I just couldn't see that many, abilities in here where she does this. And maybe while she's in this ultimate state, she could shrink down too, which would also be really cool. Obviously, like I'm saying, there would be a lot of hitbox, movement in here. And I've kind of already stated, for these characters that are going to shrink, maybe they shrink down and their hitbox doesn't shrink too. Maybe that's how we compensate for characters like this. Obviously, I'm not a game developer. I don't know how, stuff like that works. I just don't. I don't know what to tell you. But, this is just an idea. Obviously, if you guys have some cool ideas for how to like make the Wasp shrink, I'd love to hear them. I think it'd be really cool. But personally, this is how I would just have her. All right. Real quick, team up abilities. So these I was having a little bit of trouble with too, but I think I came up with some really cool ideas. So this first one would be called West Coast Stars. So this obviously relates to, her time being a West Coast Avenger, which I think is really, really dope. All right, so this would be an ability that she has with any other West Coast Avengers that are in the game. So like Hawkeye, Wonder Man, Wanda, stuff like that, and I know you're like, Josh, Wonder Man's not in the game. Again, I know. Trust me, I know. I think it'd be a really cool character. I have a cool idea, like concept for him coming up soon. So stay tuned. But somebody that is in the West Coast Avengers that's already in the game is Hawkeye. So I'm thinking he would be a good anchor for this. And he would get a slight damage boost, nothing crazy since he's just an anchor. But I think the Wasp here would have a really cool ability, which is she'd be able to shrink down and when pressed upon, shine as bright as possible, blinding nearby enemies. Using, her abilities. I think this would be really cool. She's like a little like flash grenade. You can kind of like sneak in somewhere, boom, blind them and then fly out real quick. And this kind of going off, like I don't really have a lot of, abilities where she can shrink. So I think a good, like offset is maybe her team up abilities, kind of show these powers for us, you're like, Josh, it should just be in her base kit already. Again, I agree, I know, but you could definitely put it in something like this, if you don't really, can't find a way for her to shrink and stuff like that. And, her base kit, you can have it in the team ups. And if you've watched my last video, I'm not trying to plug my videos, I'm just saying, in relation, for Ant-Man, I had a cool team up for Ant-Man and the Wasp, which is different than this one, which we're about to talk about. But for that one, it's where they shared a team up. Ant-Man was the anchor, and the Wasp was the recipient, where the Wasp would actually turn into, like, Giant Man. She'd turn into a giant, like, Wasp. And she could just stomp around and do whatever. Kind of like how Ant-Man would do in his character concept. He would do that for his ult. Wasp would be able to do that in her team up ability. So, she could still have a really cool kit and like maybe only shrink, in a few animation and movement abilities. And then maybe in these team ups, she could really have the time to shine and, train, grow big and all that stuff like that. These are just ideas, I'm just throwing out there. I think it'd be really cool. Wasp is one of my favorite Avengers. She's one of the OG, I love her in the movies. I love her in the comics. So I would definitely want to see her get represented in the game. All right. So for the last one, familiar ancestors. I mean, like Josh, you have got to stop with the puns. I'm not gonna lie, that's one of my favorite parts about doing these character concepts, coming up with the fun names for the abilities. So, but this one would work where the Wasp would be an anchor to her husband, which is Ant-Man, and she would actually be receiving a slight movement boost, which I think would be really dope. And then Ant-Man would be receiving a secondary ability, obviously like triangle, square, circle, whatever you want to call it. And whenever he does this, he would call upon a fellow ant that would come rushing in with a small vial of these wasp healing particles that she would be having in her base kit, and it would be like a small blast healing effect. So he could be healing himself, he could be healing people near him. I don't know. I think there's be like a really cool like niche ability. I've already talked about how Ant-Man would be like a really cool technical character. Well, I think this ability from the Wasp would like really help. There's like dive angles or certain situations where you need burst healing real quick. I think this would be really cool ability. And, a team ups I've seen before in the game, they kind of favor DPS tanks where you kind of have, the supports, holding down that anchor role. So, I was kind of doing, I was given Ant-Man the anchor role in the first one, letting the Wasp having time to shine, and I was kind of following the format for the second ability. Either way, I think both abilities are super, super dope. If you have any cool abilities, let me know. I'd definitely be interested to hear those. All right, lastly, possible suits. All right, I know you're like, Josh, these are a lot of suits. You are right. But like I said, I love the Wasp. I think she's a cool character, and I think, for somebody that is a fashion designer, we should definitely give her the chance, show off. I think it'd be really cool. All right. Obviously, it's not on the list, but, I think a really cool and smart idea is obviously give her a bunch of original skins. I've said this so many times before. Marvel Rivals creators are extremely talented. Their art designers are amazing, so they could definitely come up with some amazing Van Dyne designs. And they already have, if you've seen the Bleecker Street Strange skin or the other Van Dyne skins that came out recently, like, it's right there. You can have that whole line. And I would love to see, that would probably be her, like, launch skin, obviously, honestly. It's just, like, an original skin that she's made from her own line, which I think would be really cool. But, I would definitely want to see those. I want to see where they go with that line, especially but when they add the Wasp. All right, so the possible suits, got to get out of the way. The Ant-Man and the Wasp NCU skin. Personally, I think The Quantumanium skin is cool. I like it. Reminds me of the comics. I prefer Ant-Man and the Wasp, like the sequel movie. I prefer that skin. So if we could get that, I would like that one. But nonetheless, I'd be happy with any of the MCU skins. Next, it'd be Marvel Comics Heroes Return suit. This is one of my favorite comic suits, and it's kind of like the ideal, like, Wasp skin that you've seen before in the comics, where she has short hair. It's black and yellow. That's kind of just like the iconic Wasp design, and this is where it comes from. But there's like a certain way her suit is made and designed that looks really, really cool. It looks like a Wasp. It's the one I really want, so, maybe they'll choose that as her default skin, or maybe they'll go with the red and, black design, or red and blue design. But either way, I definitely want the one where she has the short hair, kind of like a pixie cut, and then she has like the black and yellow, like sleek costume. All right. Next would be this Ultimate Comics design. I've kind of mentioned this before. Hi, what's up? Thank you for joining. Good. I'm doing good. Doing good. Thank you. Like I've mentioned this before. Thank you. It means a lot. Appreciate that. Like I've said before, this is obviously the original universe for Marvel Rivals. Oh, sorry, for the Marvel Comics, the Ultimate Universe. And I just want her Ultimate Comic costume. I think that'd be super dope. I know that, like I said, the universe is gone and there's like new costumes and stuff like that, but I really like the Ultimate Universe. So I think like she should get a skin, from her original comic era there. So I think that'd be really dope. All right, so the next one, guys, we just have to have it. The classic skin. Come on, like she's an OG Avenger, and we're not gonna get it. Like it's not happening. It's not like you just gotta do it. It'd be so dope. It'd be super cool. She would have her helmet. I think it'd be super super dope. We just have to add it. I think her and Ant-Man both having original skins would be so dope. So dope. I'm so down for it. I'm so down for it. All right. Next, I know you're like Josh. What niche, skin did you pull here? For the people that know ball, you know what I'm talking about. People that don't know ball, I'm about to put you on. This is Marvel Comics Phoenix Force suit. I remember I made this like list like a long, long time ago. Somehow came across this like rare niche grail. Skin is amazing. You guys need to check this out. It is dope sauce. It would be so amazing if they added this to the game. They already have the Phoenix Force, skin line, so it's right there. Go ahead, add that Johnson. That'd be perfect. And then lastly, this is the Unstoppable Wasp, which is the Nadia Van Dyne Wasp. And I know I've been, that guy that's like, we don't need to add, different characters. If it's a different character, I'm very adamant that I don't want, Miles Morales just being another skin. Same with Spider-Gwen. But I feel like this is a situation where it's super similar, super, super similar, that you can just put the skin in here. Like obviously it's a different character, and you're gonna be like, Josh, you're a hypocrite. Maybe I am, but I think this skin the suit is super dope. If you've seen it, it's been in kind of like the more recent comics where it's like a black and like red techish design. It was kind of like when Miles Morales and the Champions and Kamala Khan were getting really, really big, like in the 2014, 2016, 2017 era. And I think Nadia Van Dyne is actually Janet Van Dyne's daughter, if I'm not mistaken. I might be, so don't go crazy. But I think that would be a really cool suit. That one I really want to see. So definitely like my top three would be that one, comic one, and then Ultimate Comics. Like I said, I like the Ultimate Comics. Like I know there's a lot of bad stuff, like storylines, narrative choices. I completely understand that. I completely get that. But the skins are pretty cool. I think her skin in that comic is really dope. I think actually all the Avengers skins from that comic run are really cool. I don't support any of their actions because they're all kind of messed up, but I think the skins are super dope, and hopefully we'll get like a cool ultimate comic line. Kind of like how we have the original first appearance line. I think it'd be really cool if we got like an ultimate line. Like I know we have some newer ultimate skins in the game. We have Storm's newer ultimate skin. We have Wolverine's, Winter Soldier newer Ultimate skin, which I think are both really, really dope. So maybe, we'll get like an Ultimate line which has Ultimate skins from the past and then Ultimate skins from the future. Either way, I think it would be super, super dope. And then, I don't know. Yeah, I think these are some cool skins for the Wasp. Lastly, accessories. I know you're like, Josh, this looks kind of bare. You're right. I took me a second to find these. So obviously, we're gonna need Ant-Man. It's her husband. There's no other way about this. Now, I think a cool idea is maybe don't make him in the Ant-Man costume. Make him be, Hank Pym the scientist. That would be like a really cool idea. They have a really cool idea of making it. They always have like really cool art designs and stuff like that with making the characters, like cutesy and stuff like that. So I have a lot of faith in them. They're married to a couple. Oh, speaking of which, real quick, I think a really cool like idea, maybe for like Valentine's Day or something, or I don't know when the anniversary is in the comics, but you can give them wedding skins. I'd really love to see that. I think that'd be really dope. But yeah, you can give her Hank Pym / Ant-Man. That's your automatic one. Like if you don't do that, then like what is going to be her other accessory, But moving on from that, we're going to have She-Hulk. So this was when I was kind of like looking online, like, what could be some cool accessories? And I came across it, and I've noticed that she has a really close connection with She-Hulk in the comics. And I'm like, oh, that's super cool. First, we need She-Hulk in the game. Have a cool concept coming for that, so stay tuned. And second, I'd be like, Rivals does a good job at, referencing characters that aren't in the game yet, through these accessories, kind of like how they do with White Box, and, you make the same argument for Quicksilver. And I think this would be like a really cool idea, I've talked before, like, I don't think She-Hulk's a year two character at all. I just don't think it's in the cards. It's not like I hate She-Hulk. I love She-Hulk. I would love for her to, hop in the game. But I don't think she's coming in year two. So, if she's not coming in year two and I'm right, you could, throw her as an accessory in right now. Like, hey guys, we're not going to add She-Hulk. We are. This is what, she might look like. This, put her as the accessory, stuff like that. And I think that'd be a really cool idea. Obviously you get to highlight, their close friendship, also. Lastly, I had to pull out some niche. I was like, I at least need three. If I don't, I had to put a third one in here just so it looked nice. I'm not even gonna lie, I don't even know how to pronounce this correctly. I think it's Boopsie the Wasp. So, like I said, I looked this up online. Super, super niche knowledge. I don't even know when this comic came out. But supposedly, I think how it went down in the comic is Hank Pym gave Janet a wasp to help her, and she named it Boopsie. And like I said, I don't really know much about it. And then I read that like the wasp died, and then Hank gave her like a bee that also was her companion. And I was like, okay, well, I think the bee's personally a little weird because she's named the wasp, and like, why would she have a bee? And I was like, gotta give props to the wasp, Boopsie or Boopsie, yeah. Like they always pull out niche characters like that in the accessories, so I think this would be like a really cool opportunity to do that. People are gonna be like, who is that? Just like how I was when I looked it up, and then you see it, and you're like, oh, that'd be really cool. And I think, I've talked about this before. Like I think Marvel Rivals does a good job with, games to comic to MCU synergy, where you can bring up characters that came out, as a one-off or stuff like that when the comics first came out, because people are like, who is this? People came up with like crazy ideas in the comics back then, and then you bring them back, and they're like, oh, that's a pretty cool character. And then now we're looking at the modern characters, or the characters in modern time. We've changed things about them, we've retconned stuff, so you could definitely add back the character. They get a little more relevant because of the game and stuff like that. And then you can add something that came out initially in the character back, and make it a little bit different, make it a little bit cool, and then we could see it in NCU or stuff like that, or just in the broader comics. I don't know. I think this would be a cool idea for that. Cool opportunity too. Nonetheless, I'm proud of my Wasp character design here. Like I said, if you have any ideas or opinions on it, go ahead, let me know. I would be more than happy to hear about them. I'm gonna upload it on Reddit soon. Other than that, we're gonna check out a game soon after this, so stay tuned. I'm really excited to do that. Other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed the weekly update and the character concept this week. I had fun doing it. I'm excited to do it next week. And other than that, Petus, have a good day.